be discussing evolution. It's something that's come up a lot recently in a book that I'm reading. So I'd like to just talk about it because there's a lot of misunderstandings, misconceptions, and just a myth about the actual topic that a lot of people, especially in the US, don't really know or find out. Especially if you go to like the public school system, they definitely won't tell you about this. So yeah, sit back, relax, and I guess enjoy. I'll just be playing Minecraft as I talk about this. All right, so first we're going to define what evolution is. So if you look it up online, evolution is the change in heritable characteristics of biological populations over successive generations. Right, so this is, whatever's on the internet, but what everyone typically thinks of when they hear of evolution, they think of like natural selection, Darwinian evolution, and it talks about that a little bit later in the definition, but it calls it out separately as being the scientific theory of natural selection, not itself as evolution, though essentially it phrases it as being inherently a part of the theory of evolution. So, what is the issue with evolution? Why am I taking up issue with it? Ultimately, evolution is something that is very contrary to the biblical understanding of humanity and life. But also, evolution is something that is very poorly understood within educational circles, outside of like the scientific community, and religious circles inside a lot of mainstream Protestant versions of it. So, having read about it recently and trying to understand it a little bit more myself, I'd like to discuss it with you guys. Evolution at its core, from the Darwinian version, institutes that organisms over time, as they evolve, become more progressed and more complex as they inherit and change to become a, I guess, fuller development, right? So it also goes into like biodiversity and whatnot, like things diversify as they evolve, sure, but like that's just based on the environment. That's like something that can be proven very easily. We look at like an animal within one biome versus an animal within another biome. They will adapt, certain traits, like their fur might be a different color, or they could have a thicker pelt versus a less thick pelt. Very, very small changes that are definitely visible and possible. However, at its core, the idea of the Darwinian theory of evolution states that things go from less complex to more complex, which is kind of weird. Like as something ages, how does it become more developed and more full than when it was inherently in existence? The concept of this was created for one reason and one reason alone. Darwin lived in the time period of the Enlightenment, and as many people know, especially within the philosophical communities, so people who know about philosophical people but don't actually study it, they just like, oh, I'm a philosopher, blah, blah, blah. Whatever. Descartes, Rene Descartes. He was a person that was very vital to add in rationalism to the world, because of the Enlightenment displacing the worldview of religion being like the dominant, important aspect of life. He was advocating for kind of a more naturalism and less of a divine nature of everything. Everything's going to be more physical, less divine. But this was, not exactly well received among a lot of people. especially within like the heavily religious countries, so non-Protestant countries, I guess nations still at this point, um, very, very unfriendly toward the Enlightenment, as they were literally uprooting the way of the world and, tearing down the structure of society. Very, very bad, very um, important event for, history. You have a lot of things that come out of it too. The Enlightenment, that is, like nationalism, imperialism, um, equality, or like egalitarianism rather. Um, a lot of important things, but also a lot of dumb things from my perspective. So basically, what Darwin did was he tried to take the ideas of the Enlightenment that had been discussed earlier by philosophers and put it onto um, like organisms and biology. And so after he got a lot of pushback from the scientific communities because he had a very poor setup of his actual, theory. There was like a lot of lack of evidence for his theory. Um, he claimed his biggest actual proof was on like sediment layers and whatnot, which is kind of a low value usage for claiming that non-complex things can become more complex. But anyway, I'll get into that a little bit more in a second. Anti-ideals, as I'm going to explain, are contrary to the Christian fundamental worldview. And the Enlightenment is directly counter to Christianity, and especially the Catholic Church in Western Europe. Um, the Enlightenment doesn't really hit Orthodoxy or Eastern Europe as hard as it hit Western Europe. France, the bastion of Catholicism, is essentially destroyed by the Enlightenment, and then further the French Revolution. The French Revolution is a direct product out of the Enlightenment. That's why I say destroyed by that. And so you have Darwin pushing his model, and he gets a lot of pushback, but also he gets a lot of support because it's being used to propagate a anti Christian idea, which at this time there's also a lot of nihilism that's going around the Enlightenment. Nihilism is like, if you want to learn about it, I suggest you read any of Nietzsche's works. He is like essentially the father of nihilism. But everyone's like, oh, Nietzsche says God is dead. Yeah, but like he also says God is dead and we killed him. He was kind of a reactionary to the concept that everything is falling apart because man is straying from a um, God-centered society and into a man-centered one. Um, a lot of people like to leave that out though because it suits their convenient discussions and arguments about their distaste for religion. Allowing themselves to be more hedonistic and whatnot, which I myself am quite hedonist, honestly. But I admit that, and I know that, and I know it's bad. I just gotta continue on and try and fix that. It's hard, but anyway, that's not the discussion for today. Um, it's co-opted with science, with Darwin, to fight against the understanding of the world and how everything works. Um, if you really think about it, the concept of evolution goes directly counter to the Garden of Eden and how that worked. A lot of the reasons that I say that is because um, the idea of the fall is man departing from divinity. right? So if you depart from the ultimate form of creation, which is like in union with God, the only way to go from there is to decay. Sin is ultimately decay of like uh the spirit and the soul, right? Sin only leads to decay. So too would being separate from, God be decay. Right. So it's used to push further separation from religion and whatnot. And then we go fast forward a little bit during the um, Lost Generation era, the 1900s, mid 1900s. Darwinism still holds strongly. Neo-Darwinianism also holds very strongly. There is a event that is held, a centennial Darwinian. And so what this is like essentially a gathering of scientists, and they discuss like the theory of evolution and like and continue operating on this model. The common thing that happens within the scientific community is that they foment very hard pushback against a group. It's very unfortunate, but it is a very common thing that happens. Hold on, give me a sec. I'm looking for. Um, okay, so after the 1950s, this is the first time period that we're going to look at. A lot of people that were at the Darwin Centennial started speaking up about their doubts about evolution, and that new sciences like molecular genetics, embryology were making it very difficult to reconcile the actual data with the supposed model and theory. Um, Things like the implications of evolution, um, and then l'évolution or l'évolution du vivant, um, were very, very big on devastating the Darwinian thought process, having a huge effect on like the scientific community. It was still very um, laden as a Darwinian world within the non-scientific community. It had basically no effect on like the broader public because they don't hear about these theses, they don't hear about these discussions, so they hold to what the schools teach them. Okay, so you have going into the 50s, scientists, like actual scientists, like physicists, biologists, embryologists, geneticists, disproven and debunking the theories, um, showing that there's too much of a lack of evidence for the Darwinian evolution. But then the mainstream still holding and teaching and continuing to believe in the now less critically acclaimed and less revered ideology, theory, data, whatever you want to call it, of the Neo-Darwinian school of thought. To these scientists, so G.A. Kirkut, he was a biochemist and physiologist at the University of Southampton in England, and then Pierre Grasse, who's like one of the most well-known living biologists, and he was a former president of the French Academy of Science. So these two people aren't just random nobodies; they're very, very well-known people within the scientific community. But again, like I said, nothing really happens. Then you push further in, especially American society, where this is still being taught, the Neo-Darwinian model. You reach the 1990s and you have other people start speaking up more and more and more uh, against this model of science, this fake model of science that is, destroying the religious kind of community within America because it's taken hold and it's making such huge discourse and debates between both the secular and religious sides, and everyone's just like up in a tizzy about it, essentially. So there's this movement that began. It's called the ID movement. It's started by Professor Philip Johnson. I forget who he's a professor on, but he makes that and like develops it, and it becomes pretty big. But more importantly, you also have what is it? Genetic mutation data that gets this next point. And mutations is being capable of accounting for the complexity of living things on the genetic level. Neo-Darwinism completely falls, especially as a theory of origins, because it's not just a theory to explain how animals and organisms change, but it became a theory to also explain the beginning of life, essentially, because as all things with science do within an age of anti-religion, they get pressed into becoming a dogma of the secular world. They state stuff like small single-celled organisms evolved into, such and such. Like, everyone knows, at least my age roughly, everyone knows that model within probably their science classrooms back in middle school, high school, where it shows like a single-cell organism turn into like a fish, and the fish turns into like a fish with legs that can walk, and that turns into like, a land mammal, or something like a monkey turning into a Homo sapien, stuff like that. The evolution theories that are pushed within schools that most people in the US know about, right? Well, those obviously start falling apart under better genetic testing and model and data investigations. Most notably in 1997, researching evolution and genetics. So, like evolution at the genetic level specifically, to basically go all in against the Neo-Darwinian theory and the scientific community's uh, hold on that. You know, adaptive, yeah, adaptive changes within organisms, it is completely impossible that they can't produce grand scale evolution, since they can't result in the like increase of a um what is it, prescriptive functional genetic info, or like the further development of more complex genetic information, and that actually through genetics it's only able to produce a loss of information as things progress. um, Notably, I would like to bring up the fact that this somewhat ties to the idea of entropy and like in thermodynamics, fluid systems, how that works, how you have uh, like specifically within thermodynamics, a closed system will over time lose energy and whatnot, and like it cannot develop more energy. You can also kind of nuanced relate that to the concept of like evolution, how it's absurd, as this scientist states, for an organism to become more complex. And just as I stated with the beginning of man, like the origins of man being creation from God. Adam is divine. He is literally like in union with God in the garden. Like there's literally no concept of sin or death or decay or like anything like that in the garden. But then obviously all that starts appearing after the garden. It doesn't just apply also to humanity. It applies to the entire world, and all animals and life within the world. So technically, man is responsible for the decay of everything when it comes to life, which, that's the side effect of turning away from union with God. Because if there's contrary to life, at that point being nothing, then the only thing that could come out of not being with life is to be with nothing. So, that's what would naturally happen. Things would have to decay. Back to what I was saying about the genetic thing. I can also relate that a bit to like elements and whatnot. So elements all have a half-life, whereas like they start as an element naturally, and then as time progresses, they all decay. Like, for example, if you have a nuclear reaction, um, you have the excitation of neutrons. They become, more excited neutrons. They can do stuff like alpha decay or beta minus decay into other elements. So, like, for example, uranium can turn into, I don't know, like cesium or samarium or plutonium, any way that they decay. But the point I'm trying to get at is, like, within fission itself, you have the spawn point of energy. If you want to, you can kind of nuance, compare it to creation, life is created. And then after the creation, in this man-made system of creation of energy, it only gets reduced and decays and like breaks down as time progresses on. Just as, like, the human body, the natural world, and animals, flora, fauna, all that does. But it might be a little bit hard to make that comparison, but I've definitely looked into making that comparison a bit. I think for me at least it makes sense because I know a bit about fission and like nuclear, I guess, energy. But yeah, so 97, Dr. Spetner, very, very big help, very important to debunking Darwinian evolution. And unfortunately, it's still taught within schools today. As as I said, I was taught it within my education. So in middle school and high school, I was taught that, like, things are working within the natural selection Darwinian evolution model. And like that was just like what everyone accepted and believed, but it's just not true. And I think we need to really try and push that, because at its core, evolution is contrary to the concept of creation and the historicity and the timeline of the world based on like the biblical perspective. So it's very important to, at least as a Christian, understand why evolution is not something that we should believe, and why we should try and fight against it. Because ultimately that is the most important thing in life, is faith in God. Like, the point of life is to attain theosis, to have union with God. So do all that you can to further your knowledge and teaching others of that. I think that's very important. But yeah, I hope you guys learned something from this. I'll do a quick recap. So we discussed the theory of evolution, the Darwinian model of natural selection. Things can make genetic changes or diversification over time. And this leads to his model assessing that life goes from less complex to more complex organisms. Pushed back within the scientific community, being shut down at the time that this is being pushed. This being pushed by anti-Christian personnel within the Enlightenment era. Students of nihilism, bad faith actors for just like secular society and the scientific community. And then time progresses, we get to the 50s, more 1950s, we get to the point where more fields of study of science are being further enhanced by new technologies. So embryology, genetic studies, biochemistry, um, physics, those things. The enhanced methods of study and data measurement lead to people to once again start questioning stuff that had been forced on society. Notable people that make a change, especially within the U.S. Dr. Philip Johnson. Then you also have, um, as I mentioned, uh, Grass, the French guy, and then the English guy that worked at Southampton University. And then you have the Israeli bio physicist, Dr. Lee Spetner, and they kind of nail the coffin down on the Neo-Darwinian theory of evolution and how it's not only contrary to data and science, um, but also how it is very converse to religion and how it's been pushed by anti-religious figures. Um, and then now to modern day where you can have so many comparisons to it, like the decay of elements and then like the effects of, I don't know, say radiation and energy and the systems that those have and how they affect the world and the environment. And then obviously the important angle of creation is the opposite of an evolutionary model. Um, you know, Genesis tells a story of creation. Evolution would seek to upend and, inverse or destroy that. Um, I think it's very important that, once again, we understand that evolution is false and that we should not continue to live within a society that will propagate and push false scientific data despite all the evidence against it. And it's very, very important to be able to understand these things so that we can teach the future generations, our kids especially, because I think wholeheartedly that Generation Bravo and Generation Alpha, even maybe, are going to be the most important generations, especially within American society, for the future of not only our culture, but around the world. The most important generation for, uh, I guess, returning to faith and also like moving away from the destructive, hedonist, materialistic boomer society that we've been strapped into for so many decades now and that we're having so much trouble continuing to live under. But yeah, that's just my thoughts. I wanted to talk about it. I talked about it. I hope it was somewhat helpful, and I hope that you did actually understand and learn something that I was saying, not just hear it and then it goes out the other ear, because I'd like to be able to help other people learn and gain insight into major issues, and this is one of those. So thank you for watching. Yeah, that's it. I'm out.